Brian Fallon, former press secretary for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. So, Brian, as you hear this report, I know you were with the campaign as the votes were coming in. What's your reaction to what you just heard about this command center, this war room, and what happened there?
Well, in one sense, it's not surprising. We did know, obviously, for many weeks leading up to Election Day about the phenomenon of fake news. You saw spikes of it. For instance, you recall that Hillary Clinton had a fainting episode around the time of 9/11 anniversary ceremony in New York. And for weeks thereafter, we saw articles popping up suggesting that there were medical reports proving that she had Parkinson's disease. And then you saw another spike after October 28th when Jim Comey's letter came out, where you saw all these fake news articles suggesting that this was the equivalent of an indictment and that Hillary Clinton was going to be, if she was elected, she wouldn't serve out her term because an indictment was imminent. So we saw these reports. What we didn't know and have only learned since the election, Aaron, is the nature of the sponsorship of these, how much it was state-sponsored by the Russian government, and also the sophistication of it in terms of the very sophisticated targeting methods. They literally had precinct-level data knowing what types of voters would respond in Donald Trump's favor to these types of reports.
Nan, you're shaking your head the entire time Brian's talking.
Well, sure, Aaron, because if we want to look at the roots of some of the problems that we've had with Russia, and surely Russia is an adversary, surely Russia, Lee Smith of the Hudson Institute has written very eloquently about how, look, Russia seeks to disrupt democracy throughout the world. We're the world's most powerful and most formidable democracy, so it wouldn't be surprising that the Russians might try to influence the process in some way. But the amazing thing is this, that enormous blind spot that James Kirchhoff just wrote about a couple of days in Politico. It was feckless, supine, and craven policy pursued by the Obama administration, including conspicuously Secretary Clinton, that lent a certain amount of potency to Russia that it should not have had. So it's hardly surprising that the Russians would endeavor to maximize
That's an interesting point, but sort of separate and a little bit different than what we're talking about right now. But Brian, let me just make the point to you, though, because you said, that you felt stories about whether her health had swayed voters, right? Hillary Clinton has spoken about these fake news stories and their impact on the election. Here is part of what she has said.
If you look at Facebook, the vast majority of the news items posted were fake. They were connected to, as we now know, the 1,000 Russian agents who were involved in delivering those messages.
Brian, the question for you, and it's just a really important one, because as Pamela said, we still don't know whether any of this actually affected the impact of the outcome of the election, right? It's this. Can you point to a fake news story that would have swayed a vote? Or were these fake news stories being circulated among people who already had a pretty strong point of view and didn't like her?
It's hard to say, Aaron. It may very well just be that. But we have heard testimony in the months since the election from FBI counterintelligence officials that have talked about the sophistication with which the Russians mounted this campaign. In other words, they didn't just write these fake news stories. They then had a very sophisticated army of Twitter bots and other adopted personas online that disguised themselves, for instance, as Midwestern blue-collar voters, so that voters would be more susceptible to sharing it and believing it because of the sort of avatars that you would think it was your neighbor down the street that was promoting the article when it was really somebody operating out of Eastern Europe on behalf of the Russian government.
So Congressman, why do you shake your head at this, though? He's right. This did happen, and they posed, by the way, it happened on the Bernie Sanders Hillary Clinton primary. But it did happen. Why shake your head at this? Why can't the president just admit, yeah, they tried to help?
There is no evidence that the president endeavored to engage the Russians in helping him.
Okay, but that's not the point. That's not the point. He still doesn't admit that they tried to help him.
If anybody should understand fake news, I will give Brian and Secretary Clinton credit, because if anybody should understand fake news, it would be Secretary Clinton, because she purveyed fake news after Benghazi, claiming it was
again, you're changing the conversation. I don't want to talk about Benghazi right now. I'm not saying it's not fair. By the way, I did a whole hour-long documentary on Benghazi.
Aaron,
Believe me, I think it's fair. It's not relevant tonight.
It's just outrageous to cry fake news when she herself utilized fake news to try to advance her cause as Secretary of State.
Okay, but Nan, what's the matter? What's the matter with just focusing on this issue? I'm freely willing to admit that I can't say that this changed the results of the election. But even if it didn't, it's still a problem that Republicans and Democrats should be able to come together together and solve. Marco Rubio said during the campaign that in the next campaign, it could be the Republicans that are the target of the Russian government or another government.
Brian,
so why not? Let's mutually resolve to get to the bottom of this and stop these foreign attempts to meddle with our democratic process.
I agree with you that we should have the most robust defense possible
But how can you talk
against
about
meddling in our
defense?
government or our free election process.
Okay, but if you're not admitting what the
entity.
problem was, Congresswoman, if you're not admitting that they meddled to help Donald Trump, how can you say you support a solution? You're solving a problem you don't admit you have.
There is no evidence that President Trump had anything to do with the efforts of the
That's collusion. The point is that they tried to help him.
Let's bring in something else. Let's bring in something else.
No,
because
let's
we
answer the question that I just asked. Why can't he admit, why can't you admit they tried to help him? It's not about whether collusion is a separate issue.
It is evident that the Russians endeavored to meddle in our democracy as they have endeavored to do.
With the intent of helping Hillary Clinton. That is the intelligent assessment of the intelligence agencies of the United States of America. It's not disputable.
Aaron, with all due respect, Fusion GPS had relationships with the Russians. They were funded by the Russians and then by the Democrats in producing the Christopher Steele dossier against then candidate Trump that was roundly debunked. So Russian efforts...
A dossier, by the way, that we have never reported on the contents on this network.
Well, then perhaps to your detriment, but it was a thoroughly...
because we will report things.
I mean, reporting that it was fake. I don't mean not reporting the contents. Kudos to you for not reporting the contents, because they were indeed fallacious. But point being that the issue regarding Russia is twofold. One is that, yes, we understand the Russians will try to interfere in the conduct of great democracies such as the United States. No question about it. Should we have the most robust defense against that? Absolutely.
Again, you're still refusing to admit the core point, which was that they did so to help one candidate and not another. Brian,
the core point is that they tried to meddle in our election and disrupt democracy, not that they were trying to elect Donald Trump. And
Brian,
even if they were, that's not Donald Trump's fault.
Right, but that actually may be the problem, that he thinks that those two things are related. Go ahead, Brian.
Aaron, if I could just jump in. I think that the problem here that frustrates any mutual effort to try to solve this issue is that Trump and Trump supporters conflate two things. The reason that, as Shimon and Pamela were explaining, the counterintelligence officers and Homeland Security officials on election night were high-fiving was because there is no evidence that there was any actual tampering with the vote totals. And that in and of itself is an accomplishment, because there was probably an effort by the Russians to meddle with those election vote totals, and there's no evidence that that actually happened. That is something to be proud of. However, the Obama administration official is also correct in saying that there's a failure of imagination if we only settle for solving that problem. There is the larger effort, more creative effort, more sophisticated effort to influence the national conversation here and spread fake news on behalf of one candidate. And regardless of whether Donald Trump colluded with the Russians in that project or not, Republicans and Democrats alike should have an interest in upholding the democratic process here in the United States. And we can't ever approach that problem if people like Nan refuse to acknowledge that the problem exists.
Not at all. Not at all.
We have to leave it there.